Welcome Victor Achem, who is going to talk about Middle East to West Africa, Shi'i Uprising, and the threat to Nigerian state. Victor is a doctoral candidate at the University of Ibadan. He specializes in social research and data deconstruction. And his areas of interest include victimology, armed conflict, forced migration, and restorative justice. And I'm looking very much forward to hear the presentation because I enjoyed the paper very much. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. As actually introduced, my name is Victor Achem. I want to thank the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies for giving us this opportunity to come and learn from divergent scholars across the globe concerning sectarianism and its divergent views. So I'll be discussing briefly on the topic I titled Middle East to West Africa, Shi'i Uprising, and the threats to the Nigerian state. This is the outline of my presentation. I'll not be spending much time, so I can keep to time. Nigeria, you all know Nigeria is the most populous black nation on earth. And it was a colony of the British Empire, which gained its freedom in 1960 and was amalgamated in 1914. And though it had various regions, western, northern, and eastern region. But for a direct rule system, the British had to amalgamate these regions to enable them have a direct impact in their style of governance. So Nigeria is known as a secular state because it provides the freedom for free religion and its practices. Over the years, Islam and Christianity has been recorded as the widely practiced religions in Nigeria. Although there are other religious practices, such as the traditional African traditional religion, which is not too significant due to global infiltration and globalization, but it's still practiced in Nigeria. And if you go to some parts in the West, you have religious practices like Songo, what do you call it, in Edo State. They still practice most of this traditional style of religion. Now, the statement of problem that has actually prompted this paper is the rise in religious fundamentalism and extremism. And this is due to the strong emphasis for the institution of an Islamic state in Nigeria. Most of us could be familiar with terrorist groups like Boko Haram, which has pledged allegiance to ISIS, and then it transformed its name to ISWAP, Islamic State of West African Province. But I will not really be talking about that. And due to this uprising in Nigeria, the government has used a forceful approach to tackle the rise of religious fundamentalism, which is, by the way, problematic in the region. And it has been recorded that the Nigerian military has used so much force to tackle the rise of extremism, most especially religious extremism in Nigeria. Now, I'll briefly talk about the evolutionary dynamics of the Shi'i group, which is known as the Islamic movement of Nigeria. It is the most populous Shi'i group in Nigeria, or should I say, the biggest Shi'i movement in Nigeria. And ever since the division in the Muslim Brotherhood, which is reflective in the Nigerian society, there have been rises of different religious groups And the IMN actually started from a small student society known as MSS, that is Muslim Student Society, in the 1970s. And it began in the way that they invited scholars, Islamic scholars from all over the world, like from Iran, from Saudi Arabia, to come give lectures. And the popular Ahmadu Bello University in Zaria, which houses the headquarters of the Islamic movement of Nigeria, in Nigeria. You know, it started as a students group, MSS student group, where divergent scholars, academic Islamic scholars were invited to come around and give lectures on what it called Islamic vacation, where they organized some conferences just like this for the sole aim of discussing Islam. Then it later moved into becoming what was known as Islamic Only, IO, which was more or less not a student group again. It's now gained sponsorship from international world. And then, before it finally became what is known as today as the Islamic movement in Nigeria. And that's a pictorial they're showing an Islamic vacation where they come together to come and discuss some of their philosophies. Now, the IMN is known as an umbrella organization of Shiites in Nigeria, which has had several disagreements with the Nigerian authorities since the 1980s till this very moment. The Islamic movement of Nigeria emerged in the early 80s as the first Shi'i Islamic organization in Nigeria. However, this organization became violent with the Nigerian government as a result of its decades of theological dispute with other Salafists in Nigeria. The group actually rejected the Nigerian constitution, the state symbols such as the coat of arms, which serves as a symbol of unity, the Nigerian flag, the national anthem, and insisted that this whole stuff be replaced with the Sharia constitution. And due to the anti-state position of this group, their leader, which is known as Sheikh Erzazaki, was detained for 9 times in 9 prisons within the period of 1981 to 1998. However, my discussion is going to be backed by a theory known as structural strain theory. Structural strain theory was postulated by an American sociologist known as Robert K. Martin, which he talks about the social strain within the social structure. And as sociologists, we understand that the society is guided by both cultural values and social control, which are the social structures that checkmates this value. I decided to put this diagram to be able to give us a brief understanding of what this theory entails. First of all, we're talking about cultural structure. And talking about cultural structure, it explains how the society carves out its identity, values, beliefs, and collective goals. And to me, our religious belief and aspirations are one of our cultural goals that helps us keep our faith. But in carrying out our religious belief, the society designs a mechanisms that gives us an institutionalized or legalized means of achieving these goals. Now, if you look below, you see reality. According to Robert K. Martin, he says that there becomes a conflict between the cultural goals and the institutionalized means of achieving these goals. That is when there is no linkage between the cultural structure and the institutionalized means of achieving this goal. In essence, what am I trying to say is that the rise of this IMN actually has the right to practice their religion. You know, Nigeria being a secular state and does not give any prohibition for religious practices. But then, the structural strain comes to play when you do not follow the institutionalized means of achieving your religious practice. Now, Nigeria being a secular state cannot become an Islamic state by just the aspiration of a particular sect. So in trying to do this theory explains that when there's a conflict between your cultural goals and the means of achieving these goals, they become an adaptive mechanism in the sense that any group or individual can decide to adapt to the system through conformity. In conformity, he talked about accepting the cultural goals and accepting the institutionalized means of achieving these goals. Then innovation, you accept your cultural goals, but do not accept the institutionalized means of achieving this goal. That means I accept the will to practice my religion, but I do not accept the condition given by the state for me to practice this religion. And it talks about ritualism, where both the cultural structure and the social structure are neglected. And it talks about rebellion, where both are totally neglected. And this is where I want to point my discussion to. Now, when a group of religious fundamentalists are neglected or victimized, it causes a big problem in conflict management. So from victimization to radicalization, here I'm trying to talk about how victimization has been known to be a propellant for conflicts in the global space. That is to say that when actors or a group of people are being victimized, either due to their belief, their stance, or their postulation, there is a tendency for this group to create a collective identity of victimization. And this identity becomes a license for bitterness, hatred, and premeditated revenge. And sometimes this identity is passed across to their generation. For instance, if you see what's going on in Nigeria today, the government have been so brutal with the Shi'i group. It took their leader in detention since 2015, and they refused to release him, despite international interference. And so, when people or actors or group of people are victimized, there is this tendency and this belief that it will serve as a catalyst for renewed violence, either in the present state or in the future. Let me just show you this diagram. This is a pictorial showing the leader of the Islamic movement in Nigeria, who is still under their detention in the federal facility. And you can see Protestants from people in Nigeria, and at the right, these are people in Iran. So, due to the victimization of this group in Nigeria, there have been several international interference. There was a case of massacre in 2015 where over 300 members of the IMN were murdered in broad daylight. There were several reports carried by Al Jazeera International, BBC, and various human rights organizations such as Amnesty International, Islamic Commission on Human Rights, and Human Rights Watch. Although the Nigerian government came out to give some excuses on why over 300 members of the Islamic movement in Nigeria were massacred, claiming that the chief of the army staff was actually returning from a function at the military base and was confronted by the members who always carry out their cultural activities through road protest. And they were asked to actually pave way for the chief of army staff to move. But along the line, they said they began to throw stones at the chief of army staff and throwing all sort of insults, which led to attacks from the military officers and killing over 300 members. So, due to this event, there were several demonstrations in countries like Iran, where the Nigerian embassy or the ambassador for Nigeria in Iran was invited to and was given a letter of protest concerning the killings of the Shi'i members in Nigeria and the unlawful detention of the Islamic leader, Sheikh Erzazaki. Since 2015, in this very moment, he's still in detention. And you could see that Saudi Arabia King Salman also came up to interfere, but he did not actually support the Shi'i group. Rather, he supported the Nigerian government, thanking them, for a good fight against terrorism and pledged support to the Nigerian government. And to me, I see this as an interference between the Sunni Shi'i schism, which has crept into Nigeria. For instance, in Nigeria today, there's no data or specific data concerning the population of Muslims in Nigeria. But from literature, existing literature and other reports, it is well known that the Sunnis are the most populous sects of Islam in Nigeria, and has tried as much as possible to victimize the Shi'i group. And one thing that is very important to note here is that this group have not really been violent as claimed by the mainstream media. Taking the 2015 massacre as an example, the group were attacked by the military, shot in broad daylight, killed over 200 of them without arms, just protest. And never has it been reported that the Shi'i group took up arms to protest. The only problem the Nigerian state government had was that their philosophy was to institute an Islamic state in Nigeria, which, it's a very difficult task, most especially when Nigeria is a secular state, almost sharing a 50-50 population between Christians and Muslims, maybe with just 10% increase with the Muslims. So, I showed this diagram earlier showing protests, and you can see by the right, those are protesters from Iran demanding the release of Sheikh Erzazaki, who has been in detention since 2015. Basically, my argument is that when group of people with a collective identity, no matter how religious or sectarian it may look like, are being victimized, it undermines the efforts in conflict management. In Nigeria today, as we speak, Nigeria is being ravaged by various forms of conflict, down from the Niger Delta militants who are aspiring for their own autonomy to control their oil resources, but has been met with force too by the Nigerian government, down to the IPOB, that's indigenous people of Biafra, which are also clamoring for secession due to marginalization, but were met with the same forceful, military approach. Now, it's also reflective in the movement of IMN. And I want you to understand that this was the same approach that Boko Haram actually followed. And I tried to give some similarities between the Boko Haram and the IMN. You see, and I just want to give this this illustration from the victim's perspective. Please pardon me if I'm not talking much about religious perspective. I'm just trying to link how victimization can lead to radicalization. Now, the IMN is based on a Shi'i theology. And philosophy. But the Boko Haram claims to be a Sunni group with the Salafist doctrine, and it actually tried to institutionalize the Islamic law as the central constitution in Nigeria, but it also faced brutal force by the Nigerian government. And if you go into literature to examine how Boko Haram started, it started through the mass murder of over 700 members in a mosque in Borno State, Maiduguri, where the Nigerian police force came into the mosque and killed over 700 of them. Actually, the Boko Haram says that its philosophy is against Western ideology. It calls Western education haram, which is Western education is a sin. And it has long time ago carried that approach and that ideology till this very moment. But the difference between Boko Haram and IMN is that IMN uses a peaceful approach, maybe due to their level of education and exposure, to advocate its own purpose of Islamizing Nigeria. Let me just use that word, Islamizing Nigeria. And secondly, both are religious movements with a radical convergence of political and Islamic agendas for the establishment of Sharia state in Nigeria. I just said that. Then if you look at the incidents that happened in Zaria and Maiduguri, which I just talked about, involved the use of force from the security operatives and started over disputes between road use. The IMN are known for always protesting. In Nigeria, they come out in mass, dress up, carry flags of Iran, and take over public space. They walk on public road, block roads, and all that, just to pass across their message. It's not like they actually go violent or carry arms, but just by blocking public roads and public facilities, the government just feel that they are becoming too excessive in their plight. Now, the government also used security forces to demolish the headquarters and the houses of the groups who supported this movement. Same thing with the Boko Haram. In Maiduguri, the government went there, destroyed their headquarters. The same thing happened in Zaria, which is the base, the headquarters for the Islamic movement in Nigeria, went there. After killing over 300 of his followers, killed three sons of Sheikh Erzazaki, and arrested him and his wife. Ever since that moment, Erzazaki and his wife have been in detention in the Nigerian government facility. So, in my discussion, if you look in my paper, I talked about how the IMN may soon follow the approach of the Boko Haram. Although they seem peaceful in their plight, but over time, due to the victimization and the human rights violation by the Nigerian government, it may, over time, become radical in the sense that its leader has been in detention since 2015. And every time its members come out to protest for the release of their leader, the Nigerian government always attacks them and kills them. You know, you could check my references and see reports from BBC and other international mainstream media of how the followers of, the Shi'i followers of IMN are always brutalized and victimized in their quest for the release of their leader, who has been in detention since 2015. And by so doing, such action by the government, such use of force by the Nigerian government, could actually instigate this group in taking a violent approach to establishing or carrying out their sole aim of Islamizing Nigeria. Now, if you look at the support from Iran, Iran has shown so much support for Erzazaki through scholarship, through training, through invitation, and so on. If you check the biography of Erzazaki, he was actually inspired by the Iranian Revolution, and the Ayatollah Khomeini, who he sees as his, should I say, spiritual figure or leader, which he pays so much loyalty to. And due to the style of governance in Nigeria, the IMN has seen that it is being marginalized, not just from the government, but from a Sunni group, which are majority in Nigeria. Although I did not talk much about that because there are no much data on that, and it would be bad to just come and give some assumption. But from my own investigation and from my own studies in Nigeria, it's so obvious that the Shi'i group are really marginalized. Forget about their demand for an Islamic state in Nigeria. And I feel that the government needs to take a better approach than the use of force and military in addressing this issue. Because every time these guys come out, they are met with brutal force. When I mean brutal force, imagine people coming out to protest without arms and are shot. Shoot them without regards for kids and all that, females and all that. You just shoot people and kill them. You know? And this is one thing that should not be undermined in conflict management. As I said earlier, when people are victimized, it becomes a big problem. They may not manifest the outcome now, but it could bring about a premeditated plan, which could eventually evolve into radicalism and extremism, just like what we have in Boko Haram today. Now, Boko Haram has become too powerful than the government. If you follow the international news or follow the news in Nigeria, Boko Haram has become so powerful that it comes to a military base, attack the base, kill all the soldiers, and move. Cut away with their weapons and move. Now, Boko Haram has become so big because it has gained international sponsorship. And if you look at this IMN group, which is a Shi'i group, after a while, these guys can get sympathy from the international world or from their sponsors. And all it just required is for them, to be militarized, giving weapons, and that's all, sponsorship. And it becomes another big problem for us in Nigeria. And as it is today, Nigeria is already occupied with so much conflict that the government cannot manage, ranging from ethnic conflict, religious conflict, and what have you. But if the government can decide to use a better approach that can, be more or less, have more or less of a human violation, should I just say that? Instead of using force, it will help to reduce the process of becoming radical. As it is right now, nobody knows what the IMN are actually planning because their leader is still in detention. And the government has always disobeyed court orders. A court ordered in 2017, a court ordered for the release of the leader, Sheikh Ezazaki, but the Nigerian government refused to release him. Although he was granted bail, they refused to release him. They were also asked to pay him a compensation of 50 million naira. I don't know how much that will be in US dollars, but it's actually very big money. That's to show you the level of human rights violation for the court to order the Nigerian government to pay the leader of the group 50 million naira shows the high level of victimization and human rights violation. But being that the government is hard-hardened, disobeyed court orders and never released him. Last year, the court also told the Nigerian government to grant him bail to go to India for a medical checkup due to his deteriorating health as a result of being kept in detention after losing 3 of his sons. He lost his sons today. He was arrested today. That was in 2015, and he wasn't released. But yet, the Nigerian government refused to release him. But so after so much outcry from Iran, he was finally released on very strict supervision and was brought back to Nigeria. So my arguments revolves around the use of force and brutalization by the Nigerian government in the fight against terrorism, which is actually not sustainable and tenable, because after a while, the group may become radical. So, in conclusion, I was able to draw from my writings and literature that the group already have what it takes to go radical. As it is now, it has over 1 million followers. When I mean 1 million followers, you should know what that means. It also have a lot of educated people, which could serve as leaders for the group. Also, the decision by the federal government to still keep this guy, this Ezazaki, in detention and disobeying court orders could also lead to the group being marginalized and victimized, which could also lead to them adopting a radical approach for their plight. However, generally in West Africa, the style of governance and the style of fighting terrorism has just been the use of force. And this has caused a lot of human rights violation, a lot of victimization, actually. And by so doing, this could actually bring about sympathies from sponsors. I don't want to actually label anything, but then it could actually bring about sympathies from sponsors and people who feel that who feel for the IMN. And all it just requires for the IMN to become radical at this moment is just to be militarized. Right now, they are very radical. Even with the killings of their members and the everyday killings, they still come out to protest. As of last week, they still came out to protest at the federal capital territory in Nigeria. They came out to protest for the release of their leader. But still, they were met with fire and tear gas from the Nigerian government. And it was recorded that about 3 of them were killed. There is no day the IMN come out to protest the release of their leader that they are not killed. And if this continues, it actually means that we may soon have the same narrative just like the Boko Haram. And from my writings, it will be fair to argue that Nigeria may be caught in between the Cold War between Iran and Saudi Arabia, in the sense that if you look at the international interference, the Saudi Arabia actually took side by supporting the Nigerian government, claiming that the Shi'i group were more or less than like a terrorist group. And it just only took countries like Iran and India who stood vehemently behind this group to protest the unlawful killings and forceful detention of their leaders. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Victor, for a fascinating paper and presentation as well. I think it's a very important project, also partly because it brings the debate about sectarianism out of the Middle East box.
Yep.
There's a tendency to focus mainly on the Middle East, and I think here it is important to have a broader perspective and a comparative perspective, and I think your paper is an important contribution to that effort. Moreover, I think it's a fascinating paper, and it speaks into a number of my own interests. Also a new research project I have just begun, it speaks into, so I'm very interested in following your project, and I will return to that at the end of my remarks. As you have learned now, my structure, my way of commenting on papers, I have 4 questions. The what, the why, the how, and who cares. And I will, of course, post them again and use them as a structure. As for the first 2 questions, the what is the topic? The why is it important? I think you could make your paper even stronger by making it more clear to the reader from the very start what is going to happen, and also present very clearly your research question at the beginning, right. Because you are actually discussing more issues and going more directions, and the reader is a bit uncertain. Okay, we learn about IMN and so on and so forth, but it takes a while before we learn why we should know about it. So it would be useful for the reader from the very start to know what is going to happen. I have a good colleague at my department who says that he really don't want to get surprised when he's reading things, in the sense that he will, from the very start, from the very introduction, know what he's going to expect. And then he is so puzzled, how is the part of the argument, how do you reach this conclusion? That brings him to continue reading, because now he gets the claim, and now he's curious to know, okay, what are the arguments for this claim? So I think if you, at the very start of the introduction, present your claim to fame, what is your argument, and then also provide the reader with a roadmap, saying, okay, we are going through. I will convince you about this argument of mine in 3 or 4 steps. That will be useful to guide the reader while reading the paper. Another thing, I think also it could be useful to reflect upon at the very beginning is what's the puzzle. And that also depends upon what kind of academic tradition you come from. As you know, I come from political science and we love puzzles. That how come? One should expect this, but it is not so, and so. So reflect upon what is the puzzle in your paper. And I would say there are more puzzles. So you should just bring it out into the open and be very clear about it. I think that could be very useful. As for the how question, my third classic question, it might also be useful if you also reflect upon and make clear your research design, and also, is it a comparative study? Because you in the second part of the paper, you begin to make comparisons between IMN and Boko Haram. This is really interesting, I find, but it disappeared quite late. So what is it a comparative study or is it another kind of study? Just to make that clear. And also you have a nice section about your theoretical underpinnings, where you draw on structural strain theory, Merton. I was wondering if one thing it might be useful if you are very clear, very blunt, is what is the purpose of the theory? Because the value of a theory depends on what you want to use it for. So if you make very clear from the start, my aim is to explain this, and I need a theory that can explain this to me. Because then I thought it could be useful if you also reflect upon, okay, why do you use this theory? There are so many theories on the market. Yeah. And you must choose one theory among many. So convince us, this is the best kind of a theory, the most useful kind of a theory on the market to explain what you would like to explain. And there I'm wondering that if this is the best theory, or if there are other theories, possible theories on the market. As far as I understand Merton and the structural strain theory, it's also, as you write, inspired by Durkheim and social anomy and so on and so forth. And that is one school, one strand. Then it has been criticized since the 1970s onwards by the social movement theory very much, criticizing it for one being not emphasizing rationalism enough, that social protest and so on and so forth does not have to be irrational or anything. It can be a very rational response according to your interest. So that's another kind of approach compared to the kind of approach you are drawing on. Also, one of the classic arguments as from the social movement theory literature would say that a grievance is not enough, because there's so much grievance in the world, and there are quite few people who actually protest. So grievances might be a necessary but not a sufficient condition, and social movement theory is then very much about, okay, when does grievances then transform into different kinds of protest? And I'm wondering if some of the theories within the social movement school could be useful for your project, also to explain how come that this movement emerges, but also how does it frame its issues and so on and so forth. How come that when does it transform from, when is it a political movement, when is it a violent movement, and so on and so forth. I think you will get some theoretical tools from the social movement theory school, which might be useful for you. So that was the how question. Then the who cares question, and again, the who cares question should not be seen as this is not interesting, but I think a lot of people should care about this paper. But the point is that it talks to different kind of, potentially talks to different kind of audiences. And maybe it's also useful for the way you're framing the paper to reflect upon who would you like to argue with, and what kind of debates would you like to contribute to, because there are more debates you could contribute to. Put differently, who would you like to impress? Which kind of audience? One debate you are speaking to is this debate about so what I have called comparative sectarianism. The point that there's a tendency to think that sectarianism is about Shia Sunni in the Middle East. But sectarianism can also be about non-Shia and Sunni, and it can also be about Shia and Sunni outside of the Middle East. And it's quite interesting actually to reflect upon, is it the same kind of sectarianism we're seeing when it's Shia Sunni, or if it's not Shia Sunni, or if it's in the Middle East, or if it's elsewhere. And your paper provides a very important contribution to that debate, to compare the dynamics you identify in Nigeria. To what extent are they similar, different to the dynamics you will find in a Middle Eastern context, for instance? So that is one place the one kind of debate to engage with. Another kind of debate is what I call sectarianism in unlikely places. That it's a sectarianism where you would not expect it, because the likely places would be Iraq, would be Lebanon, and these kind of places. And then you have sectarianism in unlikely places, Egypt, for instance. You have had, for a period after the Arab Uprisings, quite strong anti-Shia sentiments in Egypt, despite the fact that you have maybe 1-2% Shias in Egypt. There are also stories about anti-Shia sentiments among some groups in Jordan, despite the fact that you also don't really have any Shias in Jordan. So, and there Nigeria is also quite interesting, right? Because as at a point in your paper you write there might be 2-3% Shias in Nigeria. Okay, so it really shouldn't be an issue. It really shouldn't be a thing anybody cares about. But still, it appears to be an issue, and it's also very interesting to see how, in the paper, this confusion you describes very nicely as for the IMN. Is it a Shia movement or not, or how is it relates, and also its reference to the Muslim Brotherhood, but then it also references to Khomeini and so on. So this confusion, I think, is really fascinating. And there's this emerging debate about whether it is sectarianism in unlikely places, and there you also have an important contribution. Then a third kind of debate you potentially could engage in, it's also the debate about a Saudi-Iranian Cold War, as it is framed sometimes. Usually when you talk about this debate, you talk about Syria, you talk about Iraq, you talk about Yemen, you talk about Lebanon. But Nigeria, here again, is an interesting case where you point to that Iran, Saudi might play some kind of role, but is it the same way this rivalry is played out outside of the Middle Eastern context compared to the usual suspect places? So actually there you also have an important contribution, and it's very fascinating, interesting to observe. Fourth kind of debate you are relating to is what I call what is so sectarian about sectarianism. To what extent is sectarianism different from other kinds of identity politics? And that also relates to your debate about Yemen and Boko Haram. does the Shia Sunni distinction play any role, or is it actually context that matters? Repression, for instance, violent repression, and these kind of issues. So groups facing the same kind of context, the same kind of state response, will react in similar ways, no matter what kind of ideology, whether they are calling themselves Shia or Sunni or whatever, or does it make a difference? And I think there you also have an important contribution, and that relates to my new research project called Bringing in the Other Islamists, which tries to focus on whether Shia and Sunni Islamism differ. Because 80% of the existing very nuanced, sophisticated literature on Islamism happen to be about Sunni Islamism. But to what extent does it make a difference if they are Shia groups or Sunni groups? If Islam matters for Islamists, does different kinds of branches of Islam then make a difference? Or is the context more important for how they react and so on and so forth? And there again, your paper speaks into this question and can provide an important contribution. So I think there's a lot of fascinating material, and I think the challenge for you right now is to decide, okay, this paper, which direction would you want to push that? And then there's material for a number of other papers based on the material data you have here. So you can frame and actually a number of papers based on this material, I would say. And then my last question, which I will pose to everybody as well, is you're referring to sectarianism. What does that mean for you? Because I assume we have actually quite different understandings of sectarianism here in the room. So maybe it could also be useful to put it into the open, what we actually associate with sectarianism when we talk about it. So those were my remarks and comments. I enjoyed very much reading your paper, so thank you very much for giving me the chance to do that.
All right, thank you very much, sir. To me, I actually had to learn a lot when I came here from the opening lecture. And when we are talking about sectarianism, it actually it actually refers to a subgroup that could deviate from the orthodox purpose of that group. It could be religious, it could be political, or what have you. But when a small faction from a wider group decide to deviate from the values of that particular group, it becomes a case of sectarianism. And most at times, due to literature and conceptualization, it has always had that religious clause attached to it. Even in sociology of religion, you see concepts like sectarianism being addressed with the clause of religion. Although it may not just be about Islam. In Christianity too, there are sects. You have the Catholics, you have the Presbyterian, you have the Pentecostals. And funny enough, when you come to places like Nigeria, then you understand that there are also a lot of divergent sects in Christianity. You may hear of Deeper Life. I don't know, maybe you can check it, with their own. It's actually related to the Christianity, but you see them deviating from the orthodox style of Christianity. And same is applicable to Islam, Although I'm not a religious scholar, but from what I've read about literature and from my exposure, there's also a division in the Muslim Brotherhood, which has also created this, sect. And talking about sectarianism, in my discussion, I had to go religious because of the purpose of my writing and trying to establish the fact that when a religious group with international backing is being victimized, what do you expect? Look at Boko Haram, for instance. Boko Haram didn't start violent, they didn't start violent, but now they are violent. Why are they violent? For Boko Haram to be more equipped than the Nigerian military, then you should understand what it means. I'm not just giving you cock and bull stories. You can read from literature, you can go and do your research. As it is right now, Boko Haram has sophisticated weapons that can take out the Nigerian military. In fact, was it some weeks ago I read on the news where the Nigerian defense was crying out that the Boko Haram may have nuclear weapons. Can you imagine that? But I don't know how true that is. But for the military to come out and cry out that the Boko Haram may have nuclear weapon, then you should know how drastic that is. Although I'm not trying to be too religious, but then I just want to point out how victimizing a religious sect. Why do I say religious sect? Or why do I use a religious sect, such as the Shi'i movement? It's because even though they form like maybe 2 to 3% of the Nigerian Muslim population, they have a very strong cause. They are very determined about their movement. They feel that Nigeria can be an Islamic state no matter what. They do not believe in the constitution that was brought to us by the British colony. They see it as a deprivation of their rights. And then when a sect that just forms only 2 or 3% of the population comes out to attack the government or protest against the government, you begin to see issues about human rights violation, like what the military has done to them. And he talked about the reaction of other sects. To me, sects could be actually people that feel marginalized or maybe looking for political inclusiveness. And I always try to use Nigeria as an example because that's where I come from, And this topic actually, just broadened my ideas and the contribution of my discussants. It also broadened my ideas to some key areas which I will look at later. There are other sects, such like the headers farmers crisis. Maybe you have heard of that in Nigeria, which is also very problematic. And if you look deeply into that issue, why this conflict has been on for decades is due to the marginalization of the farmers who are the co-owners of the land where they farm. But then the Fulanis are migrants who practice this nomadic style of heading, where they carry their cattle and walk across West Africa. Like in West Africa now, there is a protocol by the ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States, that gives a free movement. It's called the Transhuman Protocol, a free movement for animals across the borders. You just come, maybe a neighboring country can just move their animals and flocks into the country without any restriction. And over time, these headers come and take over their land, kill the indigenes of the land and take over the land. And there have been several accusations that the government or the president, the Nigerian president, owing to the fact that he's a Fulani and his tribesmen ahead us may likely be supporting them and do not want to take drastic action to address it. So this also can be regarded as a drive or a purpose for actually, getting back their lands and getting back their rights. They feel these farmers want to be included. They want to be included in the style of governance, want to be included in the allocation of properties. And Same thing with other sects, such like the IPOB and the, what do you call it, Niger Delta militants who want to own the resources. They produce the oil. Yeah, if you go to the Niger Delta today, you see a lot of multinational oil companies. But then, over decades, there have been drastic pollution in the area due to oil spillage and mismanagement by government. So these guys took up arms. I don't know where they get the arms from. I don't know who sponsored them. But they took up arms to be able to violently, get the right to own their land and control their resources. And I'm talking about who cares about this paper. It's actually important to everybody who's interested in the conflicts, both sectarianism conflicts, ethnic conflict, and what have you. Those actors that are interested in conflict management, this paper is actually significant and important to such people. And I tried to look at how the interference from the Middle East, could actually create more problems for Nigeria, owing to the fact that this is more of a religious movement. If it was cultural in Nigeria, well, the narrative may be a different issue. But now that is about religious, and you know that in Nigeria, religious issues are very sensitive, very, very sensitive. It is easy to spark up a riot in Nigeria when you talk about religion. Talk about religion like this, it could spark up violence. And the government has undermined the capacity of the Shi'i group, in the sense that it sees that since they are minority and form 2 to 3% of the total Muslim population in Nigeria, they do not have a say. And if you look at the activities between the Kaduna State governor and the president, after the court ordered that their leader, Sheikh Ezazaki, should be released, the Nigerian government shifted the blame to the Kaduna government, saying that it was the Kaduna government that was holding Sheikh Ezazaki in detention for violating, some of the Kaduna State laws. And so it could actually become drastic in the future. And talking about the theory, a social movement theory is actually a good theory, but in sociology, a theory is just like a blank check, It depends on how the user uses that theory. And to me, I actually saw some other theories like group conflict theory. It's a very good theory that could actually help in my discussion, but then it had its own limits in the sense that it doesn't make provision for understanding religious movements, in the sense that it talks about just a group, a few group that may be marginalized due to resources and other things, But why I used Robert K. Martin's theory is that it talks about the social system and the cultural system. And these two things are intertwined in the sense that the structural system controls, the social system controls the cultural system. That is the values and belief, the right to practice your religion, but you must abide by the state rules, which is the clause, the condition, for your belief. But when you come out and say, I have the right to practice my religion, but then I want my religion to be instituted as the general practices or the rule of law in Nigeria, then it becomes a problem. It becomes a problem. And this guy you see here, Sheikh Ezazaki, is actually, the guy is actually inspired by the Iranian Revolution and gets his support from Iran, Wide literature have established that fact, and over time, actually the IMN didn't start as a Shi'i group. I told you earlier it started from a student group known as MSS, Muslim Society of Muslim Student Society of Nigeria, they metamorphosed into another group known as IO, Islam Only. And if you check out IO encompassed both the Shia and the Sunnis, you know. But it was after his declaration in Funtua, after visiting Iran, and I don't know what happened there, whether he was, you know, I don't know, he went to Iran and came back and made a declaration for the Islamization of Nigeria, which his supporters agreed. You know, since he came back, you know, then he now branded IMN as a Shi'i group. And I stated earlier that IMN is the first Shi'i group in Nigeria. You can check their websites and check everything. You know, they pay allegiance to Iran. And then the government has been so brutal with them. And the process of actualizing their goals, the process of carrying out their goals, you know. Oh, sorry, I need to talk more about the theory. Yeah.
Should we open up the floor for questions?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just like to open up the floor so you will be able also to pick on Victor's brain. And there are lots of questions. That's nice to see. Let's take two questions, and then you have the chance to answer. And then
all right.
A new round with new questions, okay? So we take you and the gentleman at behind for the first round. And you should turn your mic off, because then you can turn. Okay.
Now yeah, okay. So Victor, thank you for the presentation. I didn't know about such dynamics among Shias. And you've mentioned a lot about like religious convention and the indoctrination of these groups, but I'm interested about the local root cause. So what caused the radicalization? Because if we track all other radical groups across the globe, even the ISIS, even Boko Haram in Nigeria, all these groups have their local grievances towards the central government or the opponents or authorities who they are opposing. And in fact, the radicalization is a very complex issue, which is the combination of like identity crisis, of some ethnic grievances, like economic, social, and other dynamics. So what is the local root cause for this Shia group you were talking about? And the one more like need some clarification. You mentioned about they constitute 2-3% of Muslim population or overall Nigerian population, and where they are kind of concentrated. Are they? Is this group widespread among particular ethnicities, or where this do they constitute majority in some constituencies of Nigeria? And so, how would you describe the demographic statistics?
Thank you very much. I'm Ibrahim Zubair. I'm also in Nigeria, and coincidentally, I will be presenting people on the similar topic with that of the Victor. Looking at the topic of Victor, I looked at the work critically as well. Perhaps there is a need for him to flesh more on the penetration, how the Shia, because look at the topic, say Middle East to West Africa, how the Shiism or Shia concept or shared idea came into Nigeria or came to West Africa, and how Nigeria imbibed the doctrine as well. I think there's need for him to flesh more on that based on the topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim. I'll take your question first. You talked about the local root cause of the Shi'i crisis in Nigeria and its demographic existence. Nigeria has over at least 36 states in Nigeria, 36 states. And the North has the highest population in Nigeria, which encompasses of various ethnic identities. But in Nigeria, the two major religions I said earlier are Christians and Muslim. And as it is today, I think statistics have shown that the Muslims are more in Nigeria, maybe with just 10% difference from the Christians. And within the Muslim Brotherhood, just 2 or 3% believe in the Shi'i doctrine or follow the Shi'i theology. And funny enough, even with that 2-3%, it covers more than half of the states occupied by Muslims in Nigeria. That's to show you how strong the movement is. It covers more than half of the states in Nigeria. And talking about the root cause of the crisis, it has been on for decades. It has been on, right from the revolution in Iran. This Shi'i crisis have been on due to their principles of Islamizing Nigeria. That has been the root cause of the problem. Instituting the Sharia law as the central aims of government. And the government has always rebuked that ideology, and the approach that the government uses has always been forceful and brutal. So ever since, that has always propelled this group to keep on with their belief, due to sponsorship from the international world. Because without the international world, these guys won't have the funds, the resources to carry out this ideology. And it will please you to know that Iran also has a cultural attaché in Nigeria, where they send most of their delegates to come and propagate. They come to preach Islam. They come to propagate Islam in Nigeria. So this shows you how serious this issue is. And I'm talking about the demographics. I've actually answered that question. They form 2 to 3% of the Muslim population, but are covered. They have their tentacles spread across the dominated areas of Islam in Nigeria, and that has what has actually caused most of the conflicts there. Sometimes you come and see protests by the Shi'i group, and then you see a counter protest again from the Sunnis, maybe by stoning them or insulting them. A lot of times you see such like that in Nigeria. For instance, when you go on social media, you see. I was able to go on a news site in Nigeria, a popular news site, where they talked about the Shi'i being massacred. And if you go there, you see other Muslims who are not Shi'i saying, "Okay, kill them," using words like "kill them," useless people, all those kind of stuff. Then you begin to understand how deep this problem is. Then Dr. Ibrahim is talking about shedding more light on how the Shi'ism came into Nigeria. Well, I talked about that in my paper. You could actually go through it. I talked about the evolutionary dynamics of Shi'ism in Nigeria. Maybe I didn't actually reflect on that on this slide, but then if you go to my paper, I talked about it, how they evolved, how it started. I started from the academic group in AB Zaria, gradually into Islamic only. Then, after the revolution, Sheikh Ezazaki came back to Nigeria and declared his intention for the Islamic movement in Nigeria. So all those periods were periods of evolution within the Shi'i sect. And it would be good if you actually just glance through it and see although it's actually opened for further contribution, since you are one of a religious scholar in Nigeria. So I hope that we could actually see, or I could actually hear more of your paper to see how we, we could actually shed more light on the penetration of Shi'ism into Nigeria. Thank you.